Hello friends, I'm Kreestin and this is my annual top 10 list of this year's video games. 2021 was sort of a weird year in games for me, but everything I played is on the screen you're seeing right now. There were a couple of letdowns and a couple of surprises, but I still managed to put together a top 10 that I feel pretty good about. Before I get started, I do just want to put out a gentle reminder that there might be minor spoilers for any of the games listed, so if you want to avoid that for any of them, you can check the description for timestamps to jump on to the next one. With that said, let's jump into the list. Kicking off this year's list at number 10 is a game called Unpacking. Unpacking is a relaxing little game about exactly what the title says it is, unpacking. It has some elements of a puzzle game and some glimmers of a decorating game, but it isn't fully either thing. For me, it was more of a relaxing experience than anything else. Throughout the game, you follow along in someone's life as they grow up, starting from when they're a child, all the way through to their adulthood. You get to glean facts about their life and personality through their possessions as you unpack them, and for me, I started to feel attached to some of their longtime things that got carried along from home to home. The mechanics are pretty simple, the music is relaxing, and it's overall an almost zen-like experience if you're someone that likes organizing, which I really do. You simply take things out of the boxes and put them where they go. My only critiques for this game are that it's just a bit too pricey for its length. It's regularly priced $20 US for what took me about 2.5 hours. Also, there are certain items that I didn't quite understand, so I had no idea where the game wanted me to put them. Something small like the option of labeling the items by name would have been nice to have. There's also obviously some differences between families, because there's not a chance in the world that my mom would allow soil to be in the living room, which is where the game forced me to put it. I think what this game does best is the storytelling, which for a game without any explicit story is really good. At the end of it, I felt like I knew exactly who this character was, and I was really happy for them. I appreciate how unique it is, and I really enjoyed my experience overall. As a final note, if you're judging how high up the dishes are in the kitchen in my gameplay footage, please just know that I am tall, and I didn't realize that this was abnormal until someone pointed it out to me. Please forgive me, my short friends. I will get you a stool if you ever come to visit. Coming in at number 9 on my list is Chicory, A Colorful Tale. I'd like to start off by saying that I have a feeling this game would probably be higher up on the list for me, but I just haven't had time to finish playing it, so I kept it on the lower end just in case. Because I'm still in the process of playing this one, I'm going to keep it kind of brief, so I'm sorry in advance if I skip over any details. The gist is that you play as a little dog who accidentally becomes the wielder of a magical paintbrush and has to bring back color to the world, fight off a mysterious darkness, and try to help out the actual wielder, all while learning how to wield the brush themselves. The map starts out completely devoid of color, and you have the option to fill it in with the colors that you're given. As you progress, your brush gets more and more powers, and you can visit new areas. This game is super duper cute. All of the animals have little food names, and I love the art style. There is combat in it from time to time, but seemingly so far only at the end of each chapter, and it's not anything crazy difficult. The soundtrack to this game also deserves a shout out. It's by the same person who composed the soundtrack for Celeste, and it's super duper amazing. I'm looking forward to finishing it up, and I could easily see bumping it up the list once I do. My number 8 game of 2021 is Everhood. Before going any further on this one, I do want to give a heads up that if you're photosensitive or prone to seizures, you should skip ahead to the next chapter. This game has a ton of flashing lights and colors, and it will be up on the screen. Everhood is an RPG with rhythm-based combat. You play as a doll named Red who has lost his arm and he sets out to get it back. To start out with, you just avoid enemy attacks to the rhythm of the music, but as time goes on, you eventually gain the ability to reflect those attacks back yourself and do some damage. I'm sorry if the creators of the game are tired of hearing this, but in a lot of ways, it did remind me of Undertale. It has a similar style of meta humor and art, and it goes after some of the similar themes. Without completely spoiling either game, I'll say that you get to make some decisions in a similar vein to Undertale. I had a ton of fun playing this game, especially some of the minigames. Unfortunately, I can't show you any footage of the minigames because I accidentally made all of my save files too far along in the game, but trust me, there are some fun surprises in there. My only gripe with Everhood is that, at least when I played it, there were many spelling and grammar errors. Normally, that's not something I would ding a game super hard for, but it was a distracting amount of errors. I'm not sure if this has been patched since I played or not, and I'm sure it wouldn't bother a lot of people, but it did bother me, so I wanted to mention it. I'll also throw out that the game has a pretty steep learning curve. I played it on the normal difficulty, which is the second easiest setting, and I got stuck at the tutorial still for about 45 minutes. After I got the hang of it though, it was super satisfying. Many of the boss fights and longer songs also have checkpoints you can restart at, so it's never too frustrating in my opinion. I'd also be a fool not to mention that the soundtrack is really fantastic, and it's on Spotify, so if maybe the gameplay isn't for you but you still want to listen to the music, you can at least give it a listen. Ranking number 7 on my list this year is Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion. In this game, you're a crime-committing turnip, appropriately named Turnip Boy. As your very first action in the game, you rip up your taxes, sticking it to the man. Unfortunately, you're also immediately busted by Mayor Onion, so from there on out, you end up doing a bunch of fetching and trading type quests, sort of like the type you may have seen in 2D Zelda games, and you start to uncover a mystery about your town. There's all sorts of hats and other collectibles along the way, and most importantly, a ton of papers for you to rip up. The game has a good sense of humor and lots of referential jokes. The combat's pretty simple and it's relatively short, although I learned when I loaded it up that it got some free DLC that I'll need to check out. This game also has a really good soundtrack. I especially love the credit songs. It's a silly game, but for me it never got old to rip up people's important documents, and I'm looking forward to going back to play the additional content. I even went out of my way to 100% this game, which is something that's pretty rare for me to do. It was just a fun, quick little game that I think most people would have a good time with. As a final note, I will say that if you do play this game, I highly recommend 100%ing it because there's some additional content that you get to complete that's super amazing, and I won't spoil for you. The number 6 spot on my list belongs to Resident Evil Village. I'm still a bit of a Resident Evil newcomer, having only played the remake of 2, 5, and then this year's 7, but Village solidified that I really do like this series, and I'm excited to play more of them. In Resident Evil Village, you play again as the protagonist from 7, the world's dumbest man, Ethan Winters. After the events of 7, you've settled down into a cozy new life with your wife until something bad happens, and you begin on a quest to find your baby Rose, which leads you to a mysterious town full of werewolves, vampires, and all sorts of other weird, gross things. All in all, I think it's a really solid game, and I binged it all in one day, so I clearly had fun with it. The only thing is that the game felt like it was really 4 different games jammed into one, and the last section of the game felt basically like an action game. I found that switch up to be a little jarring at times, and I only really found the section with the doll to be actually scary. The combat is your usual Resident Evil fare, as are the puzzles. I do like the inventory system in this game a lot more than in previous entries, and I also loved the ball puzzles that are scattered around. Also, I know everyone was losing their mind over Lady D, but I need to take a moment to shout out my personal favorite, Moreau, who is stupid and sad and amazing, but I won't spoil him for you. Just know that Moreau is actually the best. The game also goes balls to the wall with its silliness, which is something I don't mind in a game as long as it owns it, which I feel like this game does a good job of doing. Did I enjoy the story? Yeah. Would I want to replay it? I'm not really sure yet. If I'm comparing Village to Biohazard, I enjoyed Biohazard a bit more, but I still think Village is a really fun ride. Holding down the number 5 spot this year is Guardians of the Galaxy. I must admit that I had somewhat low expectations for this game, but I like the Guardians, so I wanted to give it a shot anyway. I couldn't have been more wrong, and I was really surprised. Guardians is super fun, and I don't think that it really got the shine that it deserved when it came out. The combat can seem a little convoluted at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's really fun. The only issue I had with combat is that my small hands couldn't really manage using Star-Lord's abilities in the heat of the moment because of the button placement. I also really love the Guardians themselves. They have distinctly different personalities from their movie counterparts, and we get to touch on some really nice backstories for them, particularly Drax. I also thought that the game was really funny without being too slapstick or over the top. I really loved Cosmo and Mantis. I thought they were both hilarious and I looked forward to any scenes that they were in, and neither one of them overstayed their welcome. The story overall is pretty good, although I do think it had a couple of predictable spots in it, but nothing worth trashing it over. The only thing holding this game back on my list is that I did run into a few big glitches during my playthrough, including getting stuck in a huddle with no audio for like 5 minutes straight. It was maddening. I also had a couple of small gripes with dialogue-based things, such as the combat dialogue getting repetitive, and that the voice actress for Gamora to me sounded like she was always yelling. There's also really cool dialogue that plays when you're walking around with the team, but it often gets cut off mid-conversation when you start some other encounter, even if you're not rushing. I felt like I was exploring pretty thoroughly, and the conversations were getting cut off midway very often. These are pretty minor gripes, though. I thought the voice acting itself was actually really good in general, save for the Gamora thing, and the lip sync animations were great. The game itself also looks amazing, and sometimes I would just stand around to look at the scenery. If you're on the fence about this game, I'd say give it a shot, and it might surprise you. My number 4 game of 2021 snuck in at the last possible second. It's called Fights in Tight Spaces. And real quick, I've got to give my friend Pumpy Tutors a shout out for gifting me this game because I absolutely love it. Fights in Tight Spaces is a tactical deck building game with a really fun twist on it, which is that you're basically taking part in action movie sequences. A lot of it is your standard deck building fare. It has a map with spots to upgrade, heal, partake in events and all that, but the combat itself is more fun to me than any other deck builder that I've played. You can pick which deck you use, but the basics are that you have movement, defense, and offense cards. Your enemies can also move around the board, and as you move on, they get more and more special abilities such as countering your attacks, mirroring your moves, and more. You really have to plan out your strategy because you can get cornered and pushed off the map yourself, and I thought that was a fun way to go about things and a refreshing twist on the genre. I think what really sets this game apart, though, is the animation style. The models are all pretty basic, but they still look really cool, and each attack has an animation that goes along with it. It's super satisfying to push a guy out a window or smash their head into a wall and see it play out. One fun thing you can also do is make the enemies attack each other, which always feels super great when you pull it off. As you progress, the game adds more and more challenges, such as ambassadors or informants that you need to try and keep alive, and even at the beginning there's always optional goals in the levels for you to score bonus cash or just bragging rights. I really enjoyed this game, and I would encourage anybody who likes deck builders to give it a shot. In some ways it is really basic, but in other ways it's really unique, and that's just what I was looking for. My third place game this year is one that I had been dreaming of for years. New Pokemon Snap. I had wanted a new Pokemon Snap game since I was printing out the stickers at Blockbuster with the first one, and this game did not disappoint. The gist is the same. You're going out and taking pictures of Pokemon in the wild for research purposes. There is a bit more of an overarching storyline, but it's not really critical for your enjoyment of the game, so if you want to snap pictures, you can easily just button mash right on through it, which I'm not saying I did, but I'm also not saying I didn't do. What I loved about this iteration is how much I think they made the Pokemon come to life. There's a huge variety of them in the game, from across all generations, and it feels like each one has its own personality. They also didn't seem to pick just the most popular Pokemon. There's all sorts of Pokemon in here that I wouldn't have expected them to put in this game. I left the game really appreciating some Pokemon that I never liked before, or that I wasn't very familiar with to begin with. Mark me down as a Ducklet fan now. It's just a duck, but nonetheless, I love it because Pokemon Snap made me love it. I also love most of the tracks in the game. They really added replay value to the game by giving most of the levels a day mode and a night mode, as well as multiple research levels per course. Each new research level adds new events and new Pokemon to the course, so it makes you want to try again and again and again. There's also all sorts of hidden encounters that you have to get just the right combination of items or the perfect timing on, so there's really lots of reason to go back to this game. Sometimes it can be almost overwhelming how much is going on, so you kind of have to accept that you'll need to play it again. But luckily, it's pretty fun, so that's not a problem. Nintendo also put out a big free DLC update a little while after it came out, which was a nice unexpected treat. The only downside is unfortunately kind of a big one, is that sometimes the frame rate in the game can be really bad and the graphics are not very good in some of the UI. I actually had been playing this game at first without my glasses on, and then when I put my glasses on for the first time to play it, I spent the actual time troubleshooting why all of a sudden it looked so fuzzy. As it turned out, it had always looked that way, I just couldn't tell because my glasses were off. So all of this is to say that if you love Pokemon, you should play this game, but if you're a glasses wearer, you should also maybe give it a shot with your glasses off to have the optimal experience. In second place for me this year is a game somewhat out of left field, Power Wash Simulator. Now wait, don't roll your eyes just yet. Hear me out. Trust me. This game is super duper addicting. I'm normally not a fan of these types of simulator games. I think they're all kind of the same and not very engaging, but this one is so satisfying to play that I was hooked instantly. In Power Wash Simulator, you do exactly what you think you'd do. You gear up with a power washer and you go to town on the world's filthiest homes, vehicles, public areas, carnival rides, you name it. There is a loose storyline that happens by way of messages you receive on the side of the screen during jobs, but you can enjoy the game without paying any attention to that. Each job earns you some cash, and you can use that cash to upgrade your washer, accessories, or buy soap. Except that you shouldn't buy soap because the soap is overpriced and kind of sucks. It's probably also important to tell you that I love to clean, and I often do it in real life to de-stress. I found that I had some pretty stressful points this year, and playing this game was a really nice way to zone out and de-stress. I found myself basically binging this game after I got it, and even though it felt like an embarrassing pick to put on the list, I couldn't deny that I really loved playing it. Like, really loved it. I've immediately gone back to it every time there's been a content update, and I will probably keep doing so moving forward. If you're the type of person that likes challenges, the game even has a challenge mode with all sorts of settings like water conservation, time trials, and accuracy. You can also go back and replay the jobs you've completed, so it's really been a time sink for me, and it was easily one of my favorite new games of the year. Before we get to the number 1 pick of the year, I wanted to take the time to call out a couple of honorable mentions. The first of these is Returnal. Despite having the dumbest name I've ever heard, Returnal is actually pretty fun. I like shooters and I like roguelikes, but I just didn't have the time to invest in it, so I had to leave it off the list. The next 2 honorable mentions are things that I wanted to put in my list, but since they're technically DLC and not full games, I decided to leave them off. The first of these is Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, which is the long way of saying the Yuffie DLC for Final Fantasy VII. I tend to have a soft spot for characters that people typically find annoying, so Yuffie's always been one of my favorites, so I was excited for this DLC, and I thought it really nailed her personality. Her combat style was also really fun, especially when you get to synergize with Sonnen. I thought the Fort Condor minigame was really great, and the post-credit scenes got me very hyped for the next installment of the game. The second DLC and last honorable mention is the Binding of Isaac Repentance. For the unaware, Binding of Isaac is one of my all-time favorite games, and Repentance was a huge expansion that landed this year. This DLC was so big that I've barely scratched the surface on it, but I really love it, and I think the game needed a nice boost and rebalance that this gave to it. And now for the moment of truth, my number 1 game of the year, Metroid Dread. This was my very first Metroid game, and it exceeded all of my expectations. I was in the mood for something challenging but not defeating, so I decided to give this a shot. In Metroid Dread, you go to a remote planet that has an X sighting, and soon after arriving, you encounter an enemy and lose all of your suit's abilities. You set out to get them back as well as to investigate what's going on this planet. It's worth noting that if, like me, you're inexperienced with the Metroid franchise, the game gives you a quick catch-up on the lore at the very beginning, which was much appreciated. Despite being a Switch game, I actually think the game looks really awesome. In particular, the backgrounds in certain areas are great to look at, and I think the cutscenes are all really well done. The controls in the game were also nearly perfect for me. Everything felt super snappy, and as you gain more and more abilities as you go on, it just gets better and better. Since it's a Metroid game, there's obviously a lot of backtracking, but the map is a decent size, plus it's broken out into sections, so it never really feels overwhelming to have to go back somewhere. As for the difficulty, I would personally place it as a bit easier than Hollow Knight. I did play my first playthrough on normal mode, and I only really had trouble with the final boss, and I did have trouble with the final boss. I found he was a lot tougher than the rest of the game in its entirety. The majority of my deaths came from the Emmy units, which I actually never found frustrating for some reason, despite the fact that I was dying repeatedly to them. I thought that the Emmy sections were super fun, and I got the good kind of stressed out whenever I found one. I'm normally not a fan of stealth, but this was just enough of a taste of stealth for me to still enjoy it. I do plan to do a playthrough on hard, and I'm really excited to try that out. This game felt like one that I couldn't put down when I was playing it, and I immediately wanted to play it again after finishing it. I say if you're even a bit curious about Metroid games and you haven't played one, you should definitely give it a shot. I loved Metroid Dread, and I want to tell the world, I love you, Metroid Dread. That's a wrap on this year's list. I want to sincerely thank you for checking out my top 10 this year. I appreciate each and every one of you, especially if you've made it this far. If you're interested in any more content, I do occasional live streams over at twitch.tv/Kreestin, and I upload here from time to time. Stay safe, and I'll see you in 2022.